Officer escorts black woman out freezes when he gets a call from the White House. The courtroom was suffocating, not because of the air, but because of the weight pressing down on Amara Collins' chest. Her voice trembled slightly, yet carried the unmistakable edge of truth as she held up a printed email. One of several she'd meticulously gathered to prove the racial discrimination she had endured for over 2 years. "This email," she said, raising her voice slightly above the murmurs, "clearly shows that I was deliberately excluded from the client proposal based on—" "Miss Collins!" Judge Walden's gavel slammed down with a thunderous crack that echoed off the marble walls like a gunshot. "You've had your time. Sit down or I will have you removed." Amara froze. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted toward her attorney, who looked just as stunned. "Your Honor, this evidence wasn't submitted earlier because the opposing counsel withheld." "You are out of order," the judge snapped, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "Bailiff, remove her." For a moment, there was silence. Then came the sound of shifting seats, startled gasps, and the squeak of the courtroom door as Officer Raymond Tuck stood and approached her. His face was a mask of authority, blank, impersonal, almost robotic. His boots clicked against the polished floor with chilling finality. "Number, please," Amara said, her voice cracking. "This is my testimony, my case. I have the right." "You've lost that right," Judge Walden barked. "Get her out of here." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Some spectators leaned forward with gleaming eyes, hungry for drama. Others turned their faces away, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak. And then there were those, smirking, satisfied, who watched Amara as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience finally being removed. Officer Tuck reached her. "Ma'am, don't make this harder than it has to be." His hand gripped her arm firmly, too firmly, and began to tug. Her papers fluttered to the ground, scattered like shattered fragments of dignity. She reached down instinctively, but Tuck pulled her upward again, faster this time, not letting her linger. "I'm not resisting," she whispered, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. "I'm just trying to show the truth." But no one cared. Not here. Not now. Each step toward the courtroom door felt like a mile of shame. Her heels clicked hollowly on the floor, swallowed by the tension in the room. The walls, once symbols of justice, now loomed like stone-faced giants watching a sacrifice. Amara could feel their eyes, the judges, the lawyers, the spectators, drilling into her back. Some held pity, most held judgment. Not a single one offered help. "I gave up everything," her thoughts screamed. "I worked harder than anyone. I kept my head down. I followed the rules. I believed in the process. And this is what I get?" She stumbled slightly as Tuck opened the heavy doors. The hallway outside was cold and silent. The sudden absence of the crowd's gaze only made her humiliation sharper. Inside the courtroom, voices rose again, continuing without her, as if she never mattered at all. She looked over her shoulder. The judge didn't glance back. The court reporter continued typing. Her lawyer, Marcus, was already arguing with the judge, his voice rising, but faint, too faint. Amara's voice had been silenced, replaced. Tuck led her to a bench outside the courtroom and let go. She stood there stunned, breath shallow. Her hands trembled as she reached for the scattered documents still clutched in her arms. Her evidence, her proof. Useless now. She sank onto the bench and stared at the floor, blinking back the storm rising inside her. "I sacrificed everything to be heard," she thought bitterly, "and they threw me out like garbage." A wave of nausea hit her, not because she was afraid, but because she had finally seen the truth. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way. It was never meant for people like her to win, not unless they bled first. Across from her, a janitor quietly swept the hallway, the sound of bristles against tile the only noise. Even that felt mocking. "Clean up the mess. Move on." Amara sat hunched on the cold wooden bench just outside courtroom 4B, her arms locked tightly around the stack of legal documents she had spent months preparing. Her fingers trembled, but she refused to let go. They were more than just papers. They were her voice, her proof, her fight. And now, they were all she had left. Her breathing came in short, shallow bursts, The overhead fluorescent lights flickered faintly above, casting a sterile, unforgiving glow that only deepened the weight of humiliation pressing on her chest. Each second stretched endlessly, the sound of muffled voices echoing from inside the courtroom where her fate was being decided without her. She could still feel the imprint of Officer Tuck's hand on her arm, firm, unfeeling, decisive, as if she were an intruder in her own life, a threat to the very system she had trusted to deliver justice. He stood a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable beneath the crisp, pressed lines of his uniform. Amara didn't look at him at first. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. But then, with the ache in her throat growing unbearable, she asked the question anyway. Low, bitter, barely above a whisper. Why? You saw what they were doing in there. You knew it wasn't right. Tuck didn't flinch. He didn't even meet her eyes. I was just following orders, he said flatly. The words hit harder than any shove. Just 4 words. Cold. Final. Brutal. Amara stared at him, her mouth slightly open. It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it. Like it was nothing. Like removing her from the courtroom, from her own story, was as routine as locking a door or flipping off a light. I was just following orders. The same phrase used to justify countless injustices, the same excuse carved into the bones of history, and now it had been used on her. Personal, direct, unforgettable. Tears threatened to rise again, but she blinked them away, swallowing the scream rising in her chest. Number not here, not in front of him. She hadn't always been the woman trembling in a courthouse hallway, clinging to folders like a shield. There was a time, just a few months ago, when Amara Collins walked into glass towers with her head held high, heels clicking confidently across marble floors, her sketches tucked under one arm, and a reputation that spoke for itself. She had been one of the lead architects at Pearson Langford, a prestigious firm that designed luxury commercial spaces for billion-dollar clients. And not just the only black woman in the room, but the sharpest mind at the table, a woman whose visions shaped skylines. But that was before he arrived. Jason Whitmore, the new senior partner, white, late 40s, slick hair, polished smile, and the kind of practiced charisma that turned boardrooms into battlegrounds. On his first day, he made a point of calling Amara artistic instead of technical, creative instead of precise. Harmless words at first, but she knew better. Amara had felt it in the way his eyes scanned the room and always seemed to pause a beat longer on her. The way he smiled when she spoke, polite, patient, performative. He would compliment her designs in front of clients but later rewrite her plans before submission. Worse, he began assigning her less visible projects, passing her high-profile proposals to less experienced, whiter male colleagues. At first, she kept quiet. She had been through worse. She knew how to be twice as good to be seen as half as capable. But then the performance reviews started changing. One quarter, innovative and dependable. Next quarter, needs improvement in client-facing communication. Then, unclear fit with brand direction. Each critique came with a smile. Each email CC'd multiple directors. Each meeting left her smaller, quieter, angrier. Yet no one said the words out loud. No one ever said race, but everything screamed it. And when she asked for clarification, HR told her it was just a transition period. Then came the comment, whispered in a meeting room, caught on a hot mic during a Zoom call with senior staff. She's talented, but not really what our luxury clients expect. Her vibe is urban. Amara sat in her office long after that meeting ended, hands clenched in her lap, her skin crawling with fury. That single word, urban, draped like a noose around her career. She reported it. They launched an internal review. 2 weeks later, she was let go. No warning, no severance, no explanation. Just a cold, formal letter. We've decided to move in a different direction. She remembered staring at her computer screen for hours, numb. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had poured 8 years into that firm, missed holidays, pulled all-nighters, landed 4 of their biggest clients. She was a cornerstone until they decided she didn't match the decor. She didn't go quietly. Amara filed a discrimination lawsuit. She had the emails, the performance data, witnesses, at least 2 junior staffers who had overheard the urban remark. But once the case hit the court, the corporate machine reared its full weight. They hired a high-profile defense firm. They claimed she was combative, said she struggled to collaborate, said her design work was too experimental for client needs. The lies came fast and smooth like oil on marble. And now as she sat outside the courtroom with Officer Tuck standing a few feet away, Amara's mind replayed it all like a cruel documentary on loop. She had risked everything, her reputation, her career, her peace of mind, to speak up, and still they found a way to shove her down again. Every time I speak, she thought, they push me lower. The silence in the hallway was thick, so thick it could have been carved with a blade. Amara sat still, heart pounding against her ribs like it wanted to scream its way free. The sting of humiliation hadn't left her, and neither had the cold press of Officer Tuck's grip on her arm. She was still outside the courtroom, still cast out like a troublemaker. Her fingers tightened around her documents, and she fought to keep her shoulders from shaking. Then, without warning, the courtroom doors slammed open. Marcus Kane, her lawyer, burst into the hallway like a man possessed. His face was flushed, his tie slightly crooked, and his eyes burning with disbelief. "Amara," he said, rushing toward her, voice hushed but urgent. "The judge just recessed the court. 15 minutes. Something's happening. Something big." She stood, her body moving on instinct. "What do you mean?" But before Marcus could answer, the sound of fast-approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. A young court clerk, her face pale and eyes wide, barreled toward them and made a beeline for Officer Tuck. "Sergeant," she gasped, panting. "Judge Walden needs Ms. Collins back in the courtroom. Immediately." Tuck blinked. "What?" "She was removed on court order." "That was 10 minutes ago," the clerk snapped. "Now the order's changed." "Changed?" Tuck asked, visibly confused. "Why?" She hesitated for only a second, just long enough to glance at Amara with something like awe in her expression. "There was a call," the clerk said slowly, as if still processing it herself. "From the White House. Director. They want Ms. Collins to finish her testimony, and they want it now." The words fell like a lightning strike. Amara froze. Marcus's eyes widened. Tuck took a half step back. "The White House?" he echoed. The clerk nodded, breathless. "Judge Walden is in his chambers. You're to escort her back in immediately and treat her with full respect." For a heartbeat, the hallway was completely still. Amara could barely breathe. Her brain tried to piece it together. Why now? Why her? Why the president's office? But the bigger question, the one that refused to leave her mind, wasn't why, but how far this must have gone for someone at the top to care. And somewhere inside her. Something cracked open. Marcus leaned toward her. "Amara," he said, voice low, "you're not just a plaintiff now. You're a headline." But before she could reply, the scene cut hard to the judge's chambers. Judge Walden stood behind his desk, still holding the phone receiver in a trembling hand. His eyes were glassy. Sweat beaded along his forehead. On the other end of the call had been the Office of Public Liaison, one of the closest branches to the president himself. The voice had been calm, measured, but its weight was undeniable. "Yes, Mr. Secretary," the judge repeated. "Understood. I'll ensure the plaintiff is given an uninterrupted opportunity to present her evidence." He hung up slowly, almost reverently, as if the phone might shatter if he moved too quickly. For a long moment, he stared at nothing, his mind racing. The gavel, the crowd, the woman he had dismissed as if her story didn't matter. He could already hear the headlines forming. Judge silences discrimination victim, president intervenes. Racial bias in courtroom exposed by White House call. His career, his reputation, everything was now tied to the next few moments. Back in the hallway, Officer Tuck cleared his throat, looking at Amara with a shift in his demeanor she hadn't seen before. Not quite respect, no, not yet, but caution, deference. He gestured for her to follow him. "Ms. Collins," he said, quieter than before, "we're going back inside." Amara stared at him, her face hard as stone. But slowly she stepped forward, her heels clicking again across the same tile floor, where she'd once been dragged like a criminal. This time, it was different. As they neared the courtroom door, bystanders who had watched her escorted out in shame now stared in hushed disbelief. Whispers rippled through the air like wind through dry leaves. Is that her? She's coming back in? Didn't they kick her out? I heard the White House called. The White House! Amara kept her gaze straight ahead. Her fingers still clutched her files, but this time it wasn't fear keeping them close. It was purpose. The moment Amara stepped back into the courtroom, a heavy silence blanketed the room like fog. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, not with sympathy, not yet, but with a quiet, uneasy respect. The same benches where onlookers had whispered and smirked at her humiliation were now filled with people sitting rigidly, watching her like she had become something else entirely. Not just a woman, not just a plaintiff, but a symbol of something they didn't fully understand, and now feared might be unstoppable. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing in the chamber, louder than a gavel. She walked past the security rail, head held high, documents tucked firmly under her arm, chin lifted just enough to signal that she remembered exactly how they had treated her. Judge Walden sat straighter as she approached, his previously smug composure now replaced with tightly controlled formality. Gone was the sharp tone. Gone was the barely concealed disdain. In its place was a forced civility, a thin mask hastily thrown on after a fire alarm had gone off. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Collins," he said, his voice lower, almost rehearsed, "you may continue your testimony." Amara didn't sit immediately. She looked at him, truly looked at him, her eyes steady and unblinking. The same man who had dismissed her, shamed her, ordered her removal as if she were a disruption. Not a woman fighting for justice. She let the silence hang for a second too long. Then she took her seat beside Marcus Kane, who gave her a small nod that said everything without a word. "We're back. Let's make it count." Amara placed her documents on the table and opened the folder slowly, deliberately, as if each page was a blade being unsheathed. She took a breath, then another. The courtroom seemed to lean in. She looked up. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, and the edge in her voice was unmistakable. "As I was attempting to present earlier, before I was removed, this email, in the chain that follows, proves I was targeted based on race." She clicked her remote, and the courtroom monitor lit up. The projector hummed softly as the first email blinked onto the courtroom monitor, its subject line innocuous. Client image alignment. But the words that followed were anything but. Collins brings a strong technical portfolio, but her presence might not align with the aesthetic our high-value clients expect. Might be better to place someone with a cleaner look forward-facing. A ripple moved through the room like electricity. Whispers rose, some jaws dropped, others clenched. Amara stood steady at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight as a blade, her fingers resting lightly on the remote. She didn't flinch. Her eyes scanned the room with quiet power. She had waited for this moment, fought for it, bled for it. Now she had their attention, not because they wanted to hear her, but because they had no choice. She clicked again. Another email. "She's very capable, but let's be honest, her energy is a bit too urban for the Marlowe rollout. That client prefers more polish, less edge." Marcus Kane, her attorney, stood beside her, arms crossed. He didn't need to say a word. The emails were doing all the talking. Slide after slide lit up the screen, each one a blow, another brick ripped from the foundation of the defense. Each message laced with coded prejudice, carefully veiled racism passed around between executives, like shared jokes at a country club. The room was no longer still. It was bracing. The defense lawyer, previously smug, now sat stiffly in his chair, flipping through his own notes with trembling fingers. His co-counsel leaned toward him, whispering urgently. Beads of sweat gathered at his temple. Amara's voice cut through the tension like glass on steel. Calm, precise, devastating. "They never said the word," she began, her tone measured, each syllable weighted with truth. "But they didn't have to. You all know what they meant." She turned toward the monitor and gestured to a highlighted line in bold. "Not what our clients picture when they think refined." Tell me, she said, turning to face the judge, then the jury, then the gallery behind her. What does refined mean in this context? What does cleaner look imply? What does too urban suggest? She didn't need an answer. You know, she said softly, because you've heard it before. Maybe in a different setting, maybe directed at someone else, or maybe whispered behind closed doors. But you know. A murmur spread among the spectators. People were no longer passive observers. They were leaning forward, pulled into the weight of the truth pressing down on the room. Another email. Let's not risk the client's comfort level. We've worked too hard on this deal to gamble with unpredictability. Unpredictability. Another word used to cage her. Marcus leaned in and handed her the final slide. Amara took it, her hand steady. She held it up for the judge. This, she said, is the updated project assignment log. After these emails were exchanged, I was pulled from 2 major accounts and replaced by less experienced employees. One of them had just joined the firm. I trained him. Gasps erupted. Even Judge Walden shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable now, his fingers twitching near the gavel, but not striking it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't dare. Amara's voice dropped to a whisper, but somehow it carried louder than before. I've spent years trying to prove I belonged in rooms like this, working late, delivering perfect designs, saying thank you after being dismissed, smiling through the comments, the side glances, the subtle corrections on how I should speak, dress, or carry myself. She turned, scanning the gallery once more. I kept thinking if I worked harder, if I spoke softer, if I stood straighter, someone would finally listen. She paused. The silence was now alive, thick with tension, guilt, realization. And now, she continued, eyes narrowing slightly, you're listening. But not because I begged, not because I earned it, not because it's right. She stepped forward. You're listening because you're afraid. That landed like a punch to the gut. The courtroom froze. The defense lawyer shot to his feet, face pale, voice cracking. Your Honor, we request a brief recess to review this new material. These documents were not submitted during discovery and… Judge Walden didn't speak immediately. He sat back, eyes locked on the screen, jaw tight. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was starting to crack. He finally cleared his throat. Granted, 15 minutes. The gavel fell, once, not with anger, with dread. The courtroom stirred to life as people began to rise, shuffle, whisper, react. Amara didn't move. She remained standing, tall and still. The judge walked off the bench. The lawyers retreated to their corners. The spectators turned to each other in hushed voices. And Amara? She stared at the screen one last time, where the words "too urban" glared back at her like a scar. But now the world had seen it, and it could no longer look away. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. Outside the courthouse, beneath the gray November sky, a storm was building, not of clouds, but of voices, determination, and outrage. The sidewalk and steps, normally quiet at this time of day, had become a gathering place of restless energy. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, fists clenched around signs painted in bold letters. Justice for Amara, silence is complicity, and equal rights, not polite silence. Their voices rose in rhythmic chants, echoing off the granite facade of the building like battle cries. Cameras flashed, capturing faces twisted with anger, pain, and passion. Reporters, microphones in hand, jostled for position, their voices urgent as they broadcasted live updates to a nation that had finally decided to pay attention. Inside the courthouse lobby, just past security checkpoints now manned by twice the usual personnel, a man in a dark suit stood quietly beside the wall, watching intently. On his lapel, a subtle pin with the seal of the Department of Justice caught the fluorescent lights. His name was Deputy Inspector Malcolm Harris, a seasoned official dispatched from Washington, D.C. Mere hours ago, his mission clear: observe, document, and report back every nuance of this explosive case. Harris's dark eyes scanned the room methodically, He had seen countless courtrooms, but this felt different. Electrified with tension, charged with significance, weighed heavy with implications that reached far beyond a single plaintiff. Inside courtroom 4B, Amara Collins was now seated beside her attorney, Marcus Kane, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her hands, though trembling slightly beneath the table, were locked tightly together, determined not to reveal any more vulnerability. She was no longer merely a dismissed employee suing for justice. She was now a symbol of a system that had failed so many others before her. Her story was no longer hers alone. It had transcended her personal struggle and had become a flashpoint for a nationwide conversation. Judge Walden's gaze flicked nervously toward Deputy Inspector Harris, then quickly away. His authority, which he had wielded so effortlessly earlier, was visibly weakened by the newfound scrutiny. The presence of the DOJ had changed everything. The defense lawyers huddled anxiously, voices low but tense, eyes darting to the man from Washington every few seconds. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by careful, nervous calculation. Outside, the chants intensified. The protesters' voices reverberated, rattling windows and nerves alike. Civil rights activists now held megaphones, their impassioned words soaring across the crowd. Today it's Amara. Tomorrow it could be any one of us. A wave of applause roared back, vibrating through the walls of the courthouse. Each chant grew louder, each voice stronger, fueled by years of bottled frustration and indignation. High above, the skies darkened, and a cold wind whipped through banners, pulling at clothing and hair alike. But no one budged. News vans lined the street, satellites pointed skyward, live signals transmitting Amara's battle to millions of viewers across America. Reporters scrambled to keep up with updates pouring in from Washington, D.C., sources confirming that indeed, a phone call had come directly from the office of the president, demanding transparency in Amara's case. Headlines exploded across news sites in real time. White House steps into racial bias trial, justice for Amara. Racial discrimination lawsuit gains national attention after presidential intervention. Inside the courthouse, tension swirled through the corridors. Security officers exchanged anxious glances as the crowd outside grew larger, louder. Officer Tuck stood stiffly near the courtroom door, his earlier confidence now drained away by doubt. The chants from outside rattled him. Every syllable seemed to echo the phrase he'd uttered without thought earlier. Just following orders. How had everything turned so quickly? Within minutes, live updates flooded social media. Amara Collins and White House call trended at lightning speed. Celebrities, activists, and politicians tweeted their support. Others shared their personal stories of workplace discrimination, stories strikingly similar to Amara's. Her pain had become a collective outcry. Back in courtroom 4B, Marcus whispered softly to Amara, "The entire country's eyes are on you now. They can't sweep this away anymore." Amara exhaled slowly, meeting Marcus's eyes. "They finally hear me," she murmured, almost disbelieving, "but only because they fear who else might be listening." The courtroom door opened again, and Deputy Inspector Harris quietly entered, taking a seat in the back row. His presence sent a visible shiver through the room, a ripple of uncertainty. Judge Walden adjusted his robe, cleared his throat again, visibly uncomfortable. "We will resume," he announced stiffly, his eyes darting nervously toward the DOJ representative. Late afternoon sunlight sliced through the broad windows of the conference room, illuminating the polished mahogany table where Amara Collins sat, eyes blazing like tempered steel. Across from her, Richard Montgomery, lead counsel for Pierce and Langford, adjusted his cufflinks nervously. The calm, arrogant swagger he'd entered with had vanished. Now discomfort radiated from him like heat waves off desert sand. He cleared his throat, offering a forced smile. "Ms. Collins, the firm sincerely regrets any misunderstandings or feelings of discomfort you may have experienced." Amara raised a hand sharply, cutting him off. Her voice was cool, firm, like ice cracking under pressure. "Misunderstandings? Feelings of discomfort?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "I was humiliated, excluded, and erased. Your firm used words like urban and unrefined to justify pushing me aside, like I was disposable. Don't insult me now with empty apologies. Marcus Kane leaned back, arms folded, allowing Amara space to command the moment. This was her fight. He'd promised to back her up, but now was the time for her voice to strike hardest. Montgomery swallowed, visibly shaken. He pushed forward a leather-bound document. We understand you've suffered greatly, which is why Pearson Langford is prepared to offer you a generous settlement. 7 figures, Ms. Collins. More than enough to move on comfortably. Amara's gaze fell briefly to the document. 7 figures. Enough money to rebuild, to start anew, to forget. But forgetting wasn't what she wanted. No, she said, softly but resolutely. Montgomery blinked rapidly, startled. Excuse me? No, Amara repeated, voice rising slightly. You think money can wash away the humiliation? The sleepless nights? The scars your words left? I didn't come here today for money. She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked fiercely on his. I want change. Real, structural change. Montgomery's face went pale. Change? Amara stood suddenly, chair scraping against the marble floor, punctuating her demand. Your company has operated on prejudice and exclusion, promotions based on race rather than merit, silence instead of accountability. You don't get to write a check and pretend it's justice. Not this time. She placed both hands firmly on the polished table, voice tight with controlled fury. I want Pierce and Langford to publicly acknowledge their wrongdoing, to issue an apology, real, genuine, unqualified, admit openly that discrimination poisoned your workplace. Montgomery raised his hands defensively, voice breaking slightly. Ms. Collins, please, be reasonable. We're willing to compensate you generously, but these demands, Amara's voice cut through his protest like a sharpened blade. Reasonable? Was it reasonable to call me too urban or not refined enough? Was it reasonable to strip away everything I earn just because I didn't match your image? She took a breath, steadying her voice. Reasonable is demanding accountability. Reasonable is changing policies, dismantling the structure that allows discrimination to flourish. Marcus leaned forward, calm but direct. Specifically, Pearson Langford must commit to mandatory diversity audits, transparent hiring practices, zero tolerance for discriminatory language or behavior, and these changes won't happen quietly behind closed doors. They'll be public, measurable, and enforced. Montgomery's eyes darted nervously toward his colleagues, who sat frozen, unsure how to respond. He wiped his forehead anxiously. This would mean fundamentally restructuring our company. Exactly, Amara said evenly, cutting him off again. It means putting principles above profits, justice above convenience. A long silence settled over the room, broken only by Montgomery's shallow breathing and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Outside, beyond the glass walls, office workers moved about their day, unaware of the seismic confrontation unfolding mere feet away. Finally, Montgomery exhaled, desperation coloring his voice. You have to understand, Ms. Collins. These things take time. We can't just— You made me wait, Amara interrupted, her voice rising, each word hammered out with brutal clarity. You made every black professional who walked into your offices wait. Every promotion denied, every idea dismissed, every career sidelined. How much time was taken from us? Montgomery looked down, defeated. Please, just give us a moment to discuss. Take your moment, Amara said, her voice steady again, filled with authority. But know this, I won't accept less than justice. Not today, not ever. Montgomery stood shakily, signaling his colleagues. They shuffled out silently, casting nervous glances over their shoulders as they exited, leaving Marcus and Amara alone. Amara sank slowly back into her chair, exhaustion briefly flickering across her face. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You were perfect, he whispered. Amara smiled faintly. Perfect won't matter if they say— Marcus shook his head, eyes serious. They won't say not now. You force them to confront what they've always hidden from. The whole world is watching. They're cornered. Amara exhaled, tension slowly easing from her body. I've spent years pretending these slights didn't hurt, Marcus. Years telling myself that if I kept working, kept smiling, kept quiet, eventually they'd see my value. Her voice broke slightly, raw honesty surfacing. But all they ever saw was skin, a label they created, defined, and used to limit me. Marcus squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Today they saw strength, uncompromising, undeniable strength. They can't ignore that. Amara straightened, reclaiming her fierce composure. Then let's make sure they never forget it. The first email arrived just past midnight, a quiet ping echoing softly through Amara Collins' small apartment, jolting her awake. Her heart raced as she opened it, screen illuminating her face in the darkened room. The sender's name made her pause sharply. It was from Melanie Diaz, a former intern at Pearson Langford. The subject read simply, "Standing with you." As Amara's eyes scanned each line, a surge of raw emotion filled her chest, tightening painfully, yet powerfully. Melanie recounted witnessing firsthand how management had undermined Amara's projects, quietly dismissing her ideas and openly mocking her behind closed doors. Her final sentence blazed across the screen, fearless and unwavering. "If you need a witness, I will be there, no matter the cost." Before Amara could process the weight of that offer, another email arrived, and another. Within minutes, her inbox filled with messages, each one a sharp, precise strike at the heart of Pierce and Langford's facade. Employees she barely remembered, interns she had mentored briefly, colleagues who had once stayed silent, all now stepping forward. Some offered their names openly, others requested anonymity, but each voice resonated loudly, unmistakably clear. "I saw what they did to you. It happened to me too. You're not alone." Every message added fuel to a fire that had already ignited into something larger than herself. Amara felt tears welling up, but this time, they were tears of relief, validation, determination. Dawn broke across the city, bringing with it a cascade of revelations that shattered any remaining illusions about Pierce and Langford's carefully curated image. The next bombshell came anonymously, delivered through a secure envelope to Marcus Kane's law office. A typed letter, carefully worded, starkly laid out allegations from a current manager still within the firm. It spoke of routine discrimination, words thrown around casually, minority employees systematically sidelined, and promotions reserved for a narrow circle defined by color rather than competence. The writer admitted fear, guilt, shame, and finally, courage. "I'm risking everything by sending this, but silence feels like complicity now. The world needs to know." Marcus placed the document gently before Amara, voice soft but steady. "This changes everything," he said quietly, eyes fierce with resolve. "They can't dismiss these claims as isolated incidents. Not anymore." As the sun rose higher, it carried a wave of relentless media coverage. News channels exploded with updates, each headline bolder than the last. Pierce and Langford's carefully polished corporate image unraveled publicly, threads snapping violently under scrutiny. Live footage from outside the firm's downtown headquarters showed reporters crowded against glass doors, microphones thrust towards stunned executives who shielded their faces, refusing to comment. Then came the inevitable. By noon, reports surfaced of multiple new lawsuits filed simultaneously against Pierce and Langford, each echoing Amara's allegations with chilling similarity. Minority employees who had long suffered quietly now stepped boldly into the spotlight, driven by the bravery of a single voice. Class action attorneys arrived swiftly, assembling victims with practiced efficiency, their presence signaling not just trouble, but potential catastrophe for the firm. Inside Pierce and Langford, chaos reigned. Emergency meetings filled conference rooms, voices raised in anger, panic, disbelief. Senior executives argued bitterly behind closed doors, accusations hurled freely now that the veil of secrecy had been shredded. Their illusion of control was shattered. Lawyers advised damage control, public apologies, swift settlements, but no strategy seemed enough to stem the flood. They were drowning in accountability, dragged under by the weight of countless injustices, finally surfacing all at once. As the crisis deepened, another unexpected ally emerged from an unlikely source. On social media, the city's mayor, a respected figure known for cautious neutrality, broke tradition and posted a stark, unequivocal message of support for Amara Collins. Discrimination has no place in our workplaces or our community. Today, I've instructed city officials to conduct a thorough audit of hiring and employment practices across all major employers in our area. The courage shown by Amara Collins in confronting injustice reminds us all that silence is not neutral. It's complicity. Change starts now. The mayor's words ignited a fresh wave of momentum. Online, hashtags surged, Amara speaks, end workplace bias, justice now. People shared their own experiences, amplifying the voices long drowned out. Activists praised Amara's bravery, describing her as a catalyst, her courage shaking a system rooted deeply in silence, complacency, and prejudice. Amara watched it unfold from her small living room, heart pounding fiercely, stunned yet empowered by the groundswell she had sparked. Marcus called her repeatedly, updating her about every twist, every revelation, every new development. The story had grown far beyond her now, rippling outward like seismic waves, unstoppable and irreversible. Yet amid the chaos, a quiet anger remained, burning steadily inside her chest. She remembered vividly every painful slight, every overlooked project, every promotion unjustly denied. Those wounds hadn't healed. They still ached sharply, reminders of battles she had been forced into simply for daring to exist boldly, unapologetically, authentically. She understood now that the fight was larger than herself. It was about dismantling systems built on silence, systems that counted on fear, compliance, and complicity to survive. She'd spent her entire career playing by the rules of a rigged game, believing that working harder, speaking softly, waiting patiently would eventually be rewarded. But rewards never came. Respect never followed. Instead, each small surrender chipped away at her until there was almost nothing left but quiet resignation. Now that resignation was gone, replaced by determination, raw, relentless, undeniable. She would not accept mere apologies or settlements. She demanded real accountability, structural change, lasting justice. As evening approached, Marcus arrived at her apartment, documents piled high in his arms, eyes alight with excitement. "They're cornered, Amara. They can't hide from this. You did it." She shook her head slowly, conviction steadying her voice. "We did it. Every person who spoke up, every voice raised today, they did it too." Marcus smiled softly. "They spoke because you gave them courage. You were first through the door, Amara. You broke it down." She exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of that reality. "But breaking it down isn't enough," she replied firmly. "We have to rebuild. Different rules, different structures, accountability at every level. That's the justice I want, not just for me, but for everyone who comes next." Marcus nodded, understanding her resolve completely. "Then we fight until we win it." Outside, dusk settled over the city, lights flickering softly to life across countless buildings. But within those lights, a profound shift had occurred, one sparked by courage, fueled by truth, unstoppable now. Amara Collins stood silently at her window, watching the city below, heart steady and fierce. She knew clearly that victory wasn't certain, that powerful forces would push back brutally against change. Yet for the first time, she felt unafraid, certain of the path ahead, because now her voice was no longer alone. It echoed through countless others, amplified beyond silence, shaking foundations built on injustice. A single voice once dismissed, now thundered relentlessly, and the world had no choice but to listen. The conference room doors closed behind Amara Collins with a firm, resonating click, a sound echoing with finality. Behind her stood Marcus Kane, her lawyer and steadfast ally, eyes clear and confident as he gently placed his briefcase onto the polished mahogany table. The room, illuminated by natural sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, a fitting backdrop for the climax of a battle that had shaken the very foundations of Pierce and Langford, one of the most powerful architectural firms in the nation. Amara stood silently for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, a warrior's rhythm, tempered by months of trials, injustice, humiliation, and ultimately courage. Today was not just another negotiation, it was a reckoning. Pierce and Langford's executive team filtered into the room slowly, faces strained, posture stiff, as if marching toward a dreaded judgment. At the forefront was Robert Pierce himself, the founding partner, known for his steely composure and ruthless pursuit of profit. Beside him stood Sarah Green, the firm's chief legal officer, whose carefully maintained neutrality was now overshadowed by visible anxiety. Marcus whispered softly into Amara's ear. "You ready?" Amara nodded subtly, eyes locked forward, her presence radiating quiet strength. "I've been ready for this moment since the day they dragged me out of that courtroom." Marcus stepped forward, opening the discussion with a voice calm yet unmistakably firm. "Today is your final chance to acknowledge the severity of the discrimination perpetuated within your company and to make amends, not just financially, but structurally, morally, and publicly." Sarah Green, clearing her throat nervously, placed a thick folder onto the table, sliding it gently toward Marcus and Amara. "We're prepared to offer substantial monetary compensation, far beyond industry standards, to conclude this matter discreetly and swiftly." Amara's gaze sharpened instantly, the offer landing like an insult rather than appeasement. Her voice cut through the room, clear and resolute. "This isn't about money alone. Money cannot erase humiliation. Money cannot buy justice." Pierce shifted uneasily, jaw tightening. "Then please, Miss Collins, state clearly what you're demanding." Amara leaned forward, eyes blazing. "First, I want a public apology, not hidden behind vague language, but explicit and truthful. Admit openly that your policies and your leadership allowed racism to thrive unchecked." Pierce visibly flinched but remained silent, allowing her to continue. "Second," Amara continued forcefully, "structural reform, mandatory diversity audits conducted quarterly by independent evaluators, ensuring that talent and merit dictate career advancement, not racial prejudice. Publish these results transparently so that the public sees genuine accountability." Marcus watched carefully, knowing each word struck deeply into the company's defensive shield. Amara didn't pause. "Third, comprehensive anti-discrimination training for every single employee, starting from executive leadership down. Educate yourselves, because ignorance is no longer a valid defense." The tension thickened. Sarah Green glanced nervously toward Pierce, her face pale. "These terms are extremely demanding. Our clients," Amara interrupted, voice icy yet controlled. "Your clients deserve transparency. Your clients deserve a firm that practices integrity, not one built on hidden bigotry. If Pierce and Langford refuses these reforms, your clients will learn exactly who they're doing business with." Pierce slammed his fist onto the table, voice trembling with anger and desperation. "You're trying to dismantle everything we've built." "No," Amara replied evenly. "I'm demanding you rebuild it stronger, fairer, honestly." A silence fell heavily over the room, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic below. Finally, Pierce sank back into his seat, shoulders sagging in resignation. "If we accept," Marcus stepped forward confidently. "If you accept, this matter can conclude respectfully. If not, you risk facing multiple class action lawsuits, federal scrutiny, and permanent reputational damage. You've already seen how public this has become." Pierce glanced helplessly toward Green, who nodded subtly. Their choice was clear, though bitter. At last, Pierce exhaled deeply, nodding in defeat. "We accept your terms." Amara remained poised, emotion carefully concealed despite the whirlwind within her heart. Marcus gave her a reassuring glance as Sarah Green signed the agreement slowly, hands shaking. Pierce followed, pen scratching harshly against paper. As the papers were signed, a sudden commotion erupted beyond the conference room's glass doors. Voices rose sharply, escalating into shouts. Everyone turned sharply, witnessing through the transparent glass the astonishing sight unfolding outside. Two security officers marched briskly alongside Jason Whitmore, the manager whose prejudiced decisions had ignited this crisis. Whitmore's face was pale, expression frozen in shock and humiliation as he was escorted forcefully toward the elevators, a cardboard box of belongings clutched awkwardly in his arms. Amara watched the scene unfold, her breath catching sharply in her throat. Memories surged back fiercely. The courtroom humiliation, Officer Tuck's hand gripping her arm, the whispers of those watching her escorted out as though she were a criminal. Her voice broke the tense silence, quiet but filled with conviction. I remember the moment I was dragged from that courtroom, treated like I was worthless, like my voice didn't matter. Pierce looked away uncomfortably. Sarah Green's eyes dropped to her lap. Amara pressed forward relentlessly. Today, the person responsible for the injustice I suffered is facing consequences. Not because he was unpopular or inconvenient, but because his behavior was wrong. Because now, finally, you're forced to look directly at what your silence enabled. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, pride evident in his expression. Change begins today, because Amara refused to stay silent. Pierce stood shakily, eyes avoiding Amara's direct gaze. We will issue the public apology immediately, he muttered. The reforms you've demanded, they'll start immediately. You have my word. Amara turned slowly, locking eyes with him, her gaze penetrating and unwavering. Your word alone means nothing. Actions speak. This is your chance, maybe your only chance, to become a company worthy of respect. Don't waste it. Pierce nodded stiffly, turning quickly toward the door, Sarah Green following silently behind. As the executives exited, the room felt lighter yet still heavy with the weight of transformation ahead. Marcus exhaled, smiling gently. You did it. You took back your dignity. Amara remained quiet a moment, staring out at the sprawling city below, reflecting. This wasn't just about my dignity, Marcus, she finally whispered, voice filled with quiet intensity. It was about every person forced to silently endure prejudice because they feared repercussions. It was about shaking the very foundations of a system that thrives on silence. Marcus nodded solemnly. And you did exactly that. Amara turned, strength radiating clearly from her stance. Today isn't the end. It's just the beginning. The world is watching, Marcus. Pierce and Langford can never return to silence again. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast golden hues over the skyline, illuminating every building in soft, fiery light. A perfect reflection of the fire now burning inside her heart. Steady, unwavering. She had been dragged from that courtroom, humiliated, erased, but she had returned stronger, braver, undeniable. Now standing in the same halls where she'd once felt invisible, she understood deeply her voice's power. Not because it was loud, but because it spoke truths others feared to acknowledge. She turned resolutely toward the doors, Marcus by her side. Together they stepped forward confidently, knowing that today justice had been served. But tomorrow the real work began, because silence was no longer acceptable, and Amara's voice would never be quieted again. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. The bright studio lights shone hotly on Amara Collins, the powerful glare almost blinding, yet she sat composed, her gaze calm and resolute, her heart hammered in her chest, the sensation both familiar and strangely empowering after all she had faced. Across from her, renowned TV anchor Elizabeth Madison adjusted her notes, quickly checking a final point before looking directly into the camera. Around them, crew members signaled final preparations, tense, charged silence filling the studio. And we're live in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, Elizabeth announced warmly, her practiced smile reassuring millions of viewers. Tonight I have the distinct honor of speaking with Amara Collins, the woman whose courageous battle against workplace discrimination at Pierce and Langford has ignited a nationwide movement. Amara, thank you for joining us. Amara nodded gently, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Thank you for giving me this platform. Elizabeth leaned forward slightly, her tone serious yet compassionate. When you began this fight, did you ever imagine it would lead here? A nationwide investigation, protests, hashtags, even White House intervention? Amara smiled faintly, shaking her head softly. I never imagined any of this. Honestly, when I stepped into that courtroom, All I wanted was someone, anyone, to truly listen. For so long, my voice had been drowned out, dismissed. I reached a point where silence was no longer an option. Elizabeth's voice softened. Your bravery inspired countless others. You're seen as a symbol now, a champion for justice. How does that responsibility feel? Amara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. If I've become a symbol, it's because the problem is so much larger than me. There are thousands, maybe millions, who've been silenced, dismissed simply because of who they are. I didn't fight just for myself. I fought for every person told they didn't belong. Every person made to feel invisible, disposable. Her eyes glistened slightly, passion and pain intertwined in her words. I don't see myself as a hero, Elizabeth. I'm just someone who refused to be quiet any longer. But if my voice helps others find theirs, then every moment of pain was worth it. Elizabeth nodded appreciatively. Your case has sparked significant national attention. As you know, the Department of Justice has announced comprehensive investigations into discriminatory practices at corporations nationwide. The hashtag number sign Amara Justice is now a viral phenomenon. Did you anticipate the magnitude of this movement? No, Amara admitted honestly, voice firm yet humble. I never expected my personal fight would resonate on such a scale. But perhaps that speaks volumes about how widespread and entrenched this problem truly is. People everywhere are speaking out because they've seen that their experiences are shared, that they aren't alone. It's no longer about just one company or one courtroom. It's about confronting systemic injustice wherever it exists. Elizabeth leaned closer, her voice now gentle, intimate. Amara, your journey began with such humiliation and pain. You've transformed that into power and change. How does it feel, knowing the world is finally listening? Amara paused, breathing slowly, emotion briefly surfacing before she reclaimed her composure. Honestly, Elizabeth, it's overwhelming. For years, I fought quietly, believing if I worked harder, endured silently, one day I'd be respected. But respect never came. Instead, my silence enabled their injustice. When I finally spoke up, it was terrifying, lonely. I was removed from that courtroom, dragged away like a criminal. Yet today, that very courtroom, that company, they were forced to face the truth they'd long avoided. She straightened slightly, her voice strengthening. The world didn't listen because I was perfect or heroic. It listened because truth can only be suppressed for so long. And now, no one can look away. Elizabeth paused thoughtfully, absorbing her words. Thousands now march, protest, and share their stories under hashtag Amara Justice. How do you feel, knowing your courage has inspired this movement? Amara's eyes shone with quiet intensity. I'm humbled, grateful, and determined. Hashtags and movements are powerful, but lasting change requires relentless action, accountability. It means holding powerful entities responsible. I hope everyone who hears my story feels compelled to act, to speak, and to ensure justice becomes reality, not just a promise. The interview concluded, Elizabeth warmly thanking her as cameras dimmed and studio lights softened. Amara exhaled deeply, rising slowly. Her phone buzzed instantly, notifications flooding in, supporters and strangers alike thanking her, sharing their stories, drawing strength from hers. Over the following days, the hashtag number Amara Justice spread rapidly, igniting conversations globally about workplace discrimination, racial injustice, and institutional accountability. Media outlets debated fiercely, politicians called for hearings, and companies scrambled nervously to reform policies before the DOJ came knocking. A national reckoning unfolded, driven by a voice once silenced. Yet amid the chaos, Amara sought quiet moments of reflection, avoiding being swept into hero worship. She never desired fame or symbolic status. She had only wanted fairness. But the world had chosen her as their symbol of resistance, an ordinary woman who dared challenge extraordinary injustice. Weeks later, walking hand in hand through the tree-lined paths of a city park with her daughter Ava, Amara finally allowed herself a brief moment of peace. Laughter echoed softly, sunlight dancing through leaves as families enjoyed carefree afternoons. Ava skipped beside her, innocence untouched by the storm her mother had weathered. As they sat together on a shaded bench, Amara's phone vibrated sharply. Glancing down, she frowned slightly. Unknown number. Answering cautiously, a calm, official voice spoke clearly. Ms. Collins, this is Carla Thompson from the White House Office of Public Engagement. President Wilson extends his personal congratulations on your remarkable courage. He'd like to invite you to speak at an upcoming national summit focused on labor reform and workplace justice. Your story, your voice, has resonated profoundly. Amara paused, stunned into momentary silence. She looked toward Ava, who watched curiously, unaware of the significance. Thank you, Amara finally answered quietly, voice steady despite overwhelming emotion. Please tell the president I'd be honored to join. Ending the call, she stared thoughtfully at her phone, heart pounding. Ava gently tugged her sleeve. Mommy, was that someone important? Amara smiled softly, embracing her daughter. Yes, sweetheart, very important. Are you famous now, Mommy? Amara laughed gently, holding her daughter close. No, baby, not famous, but finally someone listened. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting warm, golden hues across the peaceful park, Amara reflected silently on the journey she had traveled, from humiliation to hope, from silence to strength. Once, she'd been dragged from that courtroom, shamed, erased. Now, her voice echoed nationwide, shaking foundations built upon silence and complicity. She hadn't sought heroism or symbolism, only fairness, respect, justice. Yet somehow her struggle had become emblematic, her words rallying cries for countless others fighting similar battles. A single voice, once disregarded, had ignited a chorus too powerful to silence. She glanced down again at Ava, whose wide eyes watched the world innocently, unaware yet of struggles beyond her playground. Amara's voice softened gently. Ava, always remember, your voice matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Ava nodded solemnly, sensing importance in her mother's words without fully comprehending. Amara smiled softly, knowing someday Ava would understand completely. Together they stood, walking slowly toward the sunset-painted horizon, shadows stretching long behind them. The path ahead wasn't guaranteed. Justice required relentless pursuit, unyielding determination. But for now, she allowed herself peace, gratitude, quiet satisfaction. She whispered softly to herself, voice filled with quiet triumph. I only ever wanted to be heard, and finally the world listened. The true power of Amara Collins' story lies not in courtroom victories or corporate concessions, but in its relentless, vivid portrayal of the quiet injustices we often accept as normal. Amara's journey is not just a single woman's battle against workplace discrimination. It's a piercing spotlight aimed squarely at a system built upon layers of subtle cruelty, whispered biases, and passive complicity. From the very beginning, Amara faced a silent enemy, prejudice masked behind polite smiles and professional handshakes. Every dismissive glance, every whispered remark about her being too urban, every opportunity quietly stripped away, represented 1,000 cuts designed not just to undermine her, but to erase her entirely. These seemingly minor indignities accumulate over time, forming barriers invisible yet unyielding. Through Amara, we see the devastating impact of prejudice disguised as preference, exclusion disguised as selection, and injustice hiding behind corporate professionalism. Yet what elevates her story from victimhood to heroism is her courageous refusal to accept silence as protection. In confronting the hidden bigotry within Pierce and Langford, Amara risked everything, not merely her career, but her dignity, reputation, and emotional well-being. When she was forcibly removed from the courtroom, treated like a common criminal, the humiliation was meant to break her spirit, to silence her permanently. Instead, that moment crystallized something vital. Injustice thrives not only on prejudice, but on the silence of those who witness it. Amara's defiance revealed that silence itself can become oppression's greatest ally. Throughout her struggle, the harsh reality became clear. Injustice rarely announces itself loudly or explicitly. Instead, it creeps quietly, embedded in everyday decisions, casual conversations, and subconscious beliefs. The emails Amara exposed, Coded language designed to dehumanize and dismiss served as undeniable evidence. But her greatest strength wasn't simply revealing injustice, it was her ability to expose how casually, how effortlessly, such injustices were perpetuated by those who considered themselves fair, impartial, or even allies. The villainy she confronted wasn't loud or theatrical. It was subtle, ingrained, normalized, making it infinitely harder to combat. Amara's fight teaches a vital lesson. Real change requires not only courage, but persistence. It demands individuals willing to stand firm when the whole world seems aligned against them. Her willingness to sacrifice comfort and security for truth and fairness demonstrated an extraordinary depth of strength. She chose discomfort over silence, conflict over complicity, integrity over acceptance. In doing so, she became a beacon, a powerful symbol that awakened the collective conscience of a society all too accustomed to ignoring subtle forms of injustice. Her eventual victory, compelling Pierce and Langford to admit fault publicly, implement structural reforms, and embrace transparency, illustrates clearly that justice is possible, but never without relentless struggle. This outcome wasn't achieved by chance or goodwill. It was the hard-earned result of one woman daring to speak when everyone expected silence. Her story vividly highlights that systemic injustice can be dismantled piece by piece, but only when brave individuals refuse to accept comfort in exchange for silence. Beyond corporate accountability or public apologies, perhaps the deepest lesson embedded in Amara's journey is about human empathy and solidarity. When others began coming forward, former interns, quiet employees who once feared speaking out, and even anonymous managers, the collective voice became impossible to ignore. Each person found courage through Amara's defiance, their previously silenced voices joining into a chorus that shook the foundations of entrenched prejudice. This unity illuminated a profound truth. No one ever fights injustice entirely alone. Every voice raised in solidarity magnifies the strength of those who suffer in isolation, transforming solitary battles into unstoppable movements. Amara's courage resonated far beyond her personal circumstances, awakening an entire nation to uncomfortable truths. She didn't seek to become a symbol, yet she became one. Not because she possessed extraordinary powers, but precisely because she represented ordinary strength in extraordinary circumstances. Her battle proved that anyone could be forced into silence, but also that anyone could rise and refuse to remain quiet. The hashtag number sign, Amara Justice, became more than a rallying cry. It became a promise, a vow that silence would no longer protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. By the end, Amara stood not just victorious, but empowered. When the phone call came from the president's office, it represented more than personal validation. It was recognition that systemic discrimination demanded national attention, policy change, and lasting reform. Her individual struggle had ignited broader action, compelling institutions to reevaluate their fundamental practices. Her voice, once easily dismissed, had reached the highest corridors of power. Finally, as Amara walked peacefully with her daughter through the gentle quiet of a park, we witnessed the true beauty of her journey. The battle scars she bore were real, yet they had transformed her. She emerged stronger, wiser, more determined, not because injustice had vanished, but because she knew now how fiercely she could confront it. The phone vibrating in her hand, delivering the president's invitation, symbolized how far-reaching her courage had become. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every person who had ever felt voiceless, ignored, or powerless. The profound human lesson of Amara Collins' fight is that true courage isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's the resolve to speak truth even when facing unimaginable opposition. It teaches us to recognize that silence, however safe or comfortable it might seem, ultimately perpetuates injustice. And it inspires us to understand that when one person chooses to speak out against injustice, it empowers countless others to break their own silence. Amara's journey reveals clearly, each voice matters, each act of courage counts, and no injustice can survive forever when confronted relentlessly by truth. Her ultimate realization echoes powerfully, resonating long after her battle concluded. I just wanted to be heard, and finally the whole world listened. If Amara's story moved you, if it made your heart race, your fists clench, or your eyes well up with tears, don't let it end here. Like this video to show you stand against injustice. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful, real-life story that demands to be heard. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters, and leave a comment below if you've ever felt silenced, dismissed, or overlooked. This is your space and your voice deserves to be heard. Every like, every subscription, and every comment helps us amplify these voices and push for real change. We're not just telling stories, we're building a movement. More raw, emotional, and unforgettable stories are coming. Stand with Amara, stand for justice, hit like, subscribe, and let's keep this conversation going.